Hey, what's up? This is Christopher Stolle of Realm of the Mist Entertainment. The podcast you are listening to is part of the SJ Network. Go to s-j-network.com. That's s-j-network.com for more great podcasts and information on those shows, as well as information and ability to contact publicist Steve Joyner for more information. Just go to the website and check out the family, ladies and gentlemen. Until then, enjoy the show.
Henry, did you know William Walley, from the World of Walley podcast, is today's guest?
He's certainly got lots of interesting stories. Did I ever tell you about the time I landed on the moon?
That's pretty hard to believe. You should really stop telling tall tales. Be honest, like me.
I really did go to the moon. Didn't you ever wonder why there's tang all over the Sherpa chalet? Besides, how do I know that you're honest?
All you have to do is ask my husband, Chris Hemsworth.
Attention, rebels of the Sherpalution. Today's podcast is being brought to you by Audible. You can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And now Mr. Bruce will lead you into the Sherpa Chalet. As a reminder, all of the Sherpa's bad jokes can be purchased at the gift shop near the exit.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa.
Hey there, Rebels, and welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts and so much more, hosted by this guy, the one who's behind the mic, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa. How you doing? Good to see you. Well, sort of, you know. Anyway, we have an interesting guest. And, you know, it's funny. You kind of come across people who have all these interesting life experiences. And my guest just happens to be one of them. And before you can say who's our guest today, Sherpa.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
I will tell you that his name is William Walley. And William is the host of World of Walley. Of course he is the host. And we got to sit down over Zoom, and I got to hear some of his stories, and I found him to be an interesting cat. And I think you'll like hearing about William too. So let me ask you this. Before we do our interview, Christmas is not too far away. Have you been doing some online shopping? You know that if you go to my website, Sherpalution.com, there is a link to the Sherpa shop, and there are over 100 websites that you can check out for doing some online shopping and get some really cool stuff. And in the process of doing so, you can help raise money for Feeding America, a very nice charity. I think that's a pretty cool idea. So if you need some shopping that you got to get done, why not head on over to my website and check out the Sherpa shop. But in the meantime, you can listen to this interview with William Walley of World of Walley. Hello, Rebels. I'm in another world today. We are in the World of Walley. Mr. William Walley is our guest today. He's a guy deep in the South. I know you guys are going to think that he was from Brooklyn originally, but we have to make that clear that he is not from Brooklyn. He is from Mississippi. And he is spending some time with us in the Sherpa Chalet to let us know a little bit about the show. How you doing, William?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing this evening?
I am doing quite well.
Well, now that I've spoken, I'm pretty sure your listeners know I'm not from Brooklyn.
Could you try a Brooklyn accent? You think it would work?
I don't think I could pull off Brooklyn. No, I don't think I could pull it off.
Well, if it's any consolation, I can't pull off Mississippi, so.
Well, I've worked on this accent my whole life. It takes a lot of practice.
Hopefully not too much practice.
Just sits first.
Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, William?
My name's William Walley. I am started a podcast called World of Walley back around the end of January. I think my first episode dropped January 27th of this year. The question that most everybody either asked me when I first started or has asked me since then is, since the pandemic, you were looking, you had plenty of time on your hands, so you wanted to start a podcast. No, that is not the answer to that question. I actually had had the concept of starting a podcast for the last 3 or 4 years. I just never could find time. Either a job I had or some other obligation kept me from doing it. So I had conceptualized the actual podcast theme and the kind of what I wanted to do for quite a while. The sad thing is when I finally convinced myself to do it in, in December, between the week of Christmas and New Year's, I had a birthday, turned 50 years old. And I thought that'd be a perfect time to start a podcast with little fanfare and even less preparation, which showed early in my efforts. That's for sure. I started, a podcast. My first, I guess it was around the 5th or 6th of January. I started looking into exactly what it would take to actually start one. And then, like I said, January the 27th, I dropped my first episode, which was a tribute to, I'm a Green Bay Packer fan, and it actually was a tribute of sorts and a kind of a revelation of a situation that I should have probably handled a little differently after I heard an interview that Aaron Rodgers, the starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, did with his girlfriend, Danica Patrick, on her podcast. So I took that opportunity to craft an episode. It spawned from an actual personal interaction I had with Rodgers a few years back, a certain job I had. I worked in event security and staffing, stuff like that. And I was actually over a contract at the University of Mississippi, commonly referred to down this way as Ole Miss. He just happened to show up on an off week to see his brother, who was Jordan Rodgers, was playing at Vanderbilt at that time. He was the quarterback. And he thought he was just going to show up and be a regular fan. And that didn't work out too well. So I ended up having to make special arrangements for him and get him away from everybody so the rest of the people could enjoy the game. And he ended up on the sideline, and he ended up in my office. And him and his family, for about an hour and a half after the hoopla of the game kind of died down and the people started exiting the stadium, it was Christmas for me at that point. I had an hour and 20 minutes with a guy that I had watched on television. And I don't like using the word idolized, and I don't want to use the term hero. I don't ever use the term hero when it comes to a sports figure. I don't want to give them that much power. Heroes are people like first responders and doctors and people that help people and save lives. That's heroes. It was Christmas for me. I was a kid. He and I chatted, and if I would have had any idea where his mind was about some stuff that he talked about on the podcast, specifically he talked about his issue with his faith, and he was kind of questioning his faith. And if I would have known that, I could have stepped in and maybe said something or provided him information or just been a good solid ear to listen to and helped him with that. But I had no idea at that time, and that's kind of the whole premise of that episode was reflection on if I would have known then what I heard him say in that podcast, maybe I could have said or done something to help him in that moment. That was episode 1, and it just took off from there. I mean, it was my plan originally was to make, I had big ambitions. I was going to do 2 episodes a week. And I was going to stay on track, and I was going to crank out. I had 100 episodes worth of material in my head. Day 1, I was ready to go. And then I realized very quickly that unless you have a production team, like a guy like Joe Rogan's got, because they pumping out episodes every day, you cannot pull off that many episodes by yourself. And I'm still, to this point, I'm still a one-man band. I do have a young man that, a friend of mine that helps me with some of the editing because he's a computer guru and he does a lot of editing when it comes to music and stuff like that. So he's been instrumental in helping me kind of evolve the process. But like I said, I learned very quickly. I segued back to a 1 episode a week setup, and then I sprinkle in a second. I'm always on Friday, and then of course I sprinkle in some Tuesday episodes throughout the season, just to shake it up a little bit. But that's kind of the genesis and the continued evolution of the actual podcast itself.
Now, I know that you've actually spoken to people from all walks of life, sort of like the Sherpa does here, not just strictly limited to the sports figures, right?
That's correct. The original concept was is it was not going to be interview based. It was going to be crazy, hysterical, unbelievable events that I had been part of, or I had knowledge of, because I've been fortunate enough with a lot of endeavors that I've been involved in to get a chance to meet a lot of people, what I call common folks and, famous, according to what the world says is famous. And that was going to be sort of, revelations from myself about these events and, confessions from the tour bus kind of deal, that kind of concept. And the crazy thing is I've been doing this now since January, and I've only been able to sprinkle in maybe a couple of my own personal stories within my episodes. Now, I have got a chance to share a few of them in an opportunity like this where I come on somebody else's show and they made the mistake of giving me the opportunity to talk. And then I take up valuable airtime telling them this stuff. So right now, I'm probably sitting at about 90% of my episodes at this point have probably been interview style. And I have interviewed quite a wide range of people. I've interviewed folks that I know and I'm familiar with. I've interviewed some folks right here in my local area that are we'll call them semi-famous. They haven't really arrived at the famous level yet, but they're getting there. And then through a mutual connection you and I I've been able to line up and talk to some Hollywood types. And that's been extremely interesting because it's broken down a lot of stereotypes that I had about the people, what I consider the Hollywood type. I went in pretty jaded about that because I thought a lot of them were they were carbon copies of each other. But I've learned the exact opposite. I've learned that, yes, they're actors on the screen, but they are truly real people away from it. So
you've probably experienced the same type of thing that I have, where you get these backstories from them that you're not quite expecting. And it's like, okay, we may see you on the screen, the big screen, the small screen, but, you're just like you and I, the way that you came up and the way that you had to perfect your craft. And nobody just kind of fell into, I was a star overnight. It's, it's always a long road.
Well, I know on at least two or three of the more famous people that I've had the opportunity to interview, we actually discussed the overnight success syndrome. And I guess the best explanation that I was ever given, I interviewed a gentleman named Jeff Davis, J.F. Davis. And the name might not sound familiar, but if you go to the internet and look up Jeff Davis, actor, you will find out he has been in quite a bit of small screen and big screen stuff. He's had a lot of guest spots, especially on television. So you'll know him if you were to look him up. And I asked him, he's a guy from Maine. How in the world a guy from Maine end up in Los Angeles being an actor? And he said, one day I just had the desire to do it. So he said, I loaded up everything I had in my vehicle and drove across country, and I started a journey. And he talked about the struggles of being an actor. He was talking about, even if you're acting regularly, you still got bills to pay. So he actually shared a story about he was a handyman for an elderly couple that lives pretty close to him. That kind of resonated with me because that's a common stereotype I had. If when I looked at what his credentials were, I thought, man, this guy's got to be making good money because he's got all those guest spots. And then that kind of, put it in perspective for me. He's having to work a little side hustle to keep his bills paid. When I asked him about, would you consider yourself, no, I said, have you ever seen an example of an overnight success? He said, I've seen plenty of them. It's just taken 20 or 30 years to get to that level. So there is no true overnight success in anything, but not just Hollywood, but anything. You don't just wake up one morning and it clicks.
Absolutely. I had an interview with a comic once, and he said, oh, you see some of these comedians on the Tonight Show, and they're just killing with their routine. He said most of those routines, they're just jokes that they've been telling for the last 10 years, and now they're all packaged together, and you're seeing it for the first time. So it comes off as fresh.
Yeah, I heard Kevin Hart, he was interviewed, him and The Rock do a lot of stuff together now, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. They asked him about, right now you're considered the funniest man on the planet, with guys like Dave Chappelle and all kind of taking a back seat. Kevin Hart probably is the premier comic of the day. And he said, the problem is he told a joke, and that's what started this conversation. He said, that joke I just told, he said, I told that joke for the first time when I was 15 years old. He said, it's taken this long for it to be funny, though. That's a perfect example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes you got to catch lightning in the bottles.
That's very true. You kind of teased something, and now I got to ask you that because you said you've had some interesting stories and encounters. I was wondering if you could share one of your own personal stories on here. It could be one that you've done on an episode or one that you haven't done an episode. It's your call.
Well, it all depends. Like I've done quite a few things, and I've had some pretty wild and extreme stories that resonated from all of them. Now, I was on a show, a gentleman that you and I both know from the New York area. I was on his show just a couple of nights ago where we were recording, and he was a sports based. So we talked about some sports stuff. Like I had the fortune. It was an extremely stressful job, but I had the opportunity, as my friends called it, to have the greatest job in the world. I was a manager and then later a director in a security staff and just a sports and game day. They call it guest services. There's a lot of names it goes by. It's pretty much any venue driven, anything venue related. For example, Madison Square Garden has an event staff that works it. That's what I'm talking about. If you're trying to get perspective on what I'm talking about.
Sure.
But the company I worked for was based out of Pelham, Alabama, which is a little subdivision of Birmingham. The gentleman that started it was really fortunate. He landed some pretty decent contracts early, and the company kind of exploded on him. So I kind of got in, not in the initial, not the first couple of years the company was around, but I was in about year 3 or 4 when it came in. I was, like I said, I was fortunate enough. I had an opportunity to be a regional manager for him and then later a regional director. So I was over a group of contracts. It afforded me the opportunity to go to places and in the deep South. I don't know if you can properly grasp the concept of how important college football is to the deep South. College football ranks right up there with church services, on the weekend at the deep South.
Well put.
That's pretty hard to say because, Mississippi, you've heard the term the Bible Belt. So Mississippi is like the buckle. It would be the buckle of the deep South. So that's how important college football is. That's why I'm glad to see college football is going to come back this year and SEC is going to play. But we had contracts in places like University of Louisiana at Lafayette. We had University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg. We had Ole Miss or University of Mississippi. We had Mississippi State University. We had the University of Alabama, Auburn University. We had stuff everywhere. We had contracts in Florida. We had contracts in Georgia. It was everywhere. So I got the opportunity to go to a lot of and we had a very diverse group of events. We had stuff like college football. We had concerts. We had NASCAR. We had all kind of stuff. So, I guess if I was just working, just a regular employee for the company, that was a pretty good job. You just show up and do your job at this random event. But as a manager and then later as a director, you had the responsibility of keeping up with all these folks. So, for example, I might be I started off in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is about 25 miles from where I'm at right now, where I'm actually doing this interview with you. And I was over a contract there, but I was a part-time manager for them. So when I was available, they would call me and they would send me to all these different places. Like I would get shipped to Talladega and spend 7 days in a camper on the grounds of Talladega Superspeedway to do everything associated with that event. So you can imagine day 3 or day 4. And I say this with the utmost respect because I am one. When you get these, drunken rednecks that have been there for 3 days already, because they would plan vacations around race day, around actual NASCAR. That's how serious it is down here too. About day 3, when they've taken one shower in 3 days and they've drank 6 cases of beer and they're wandering around on the infield, they're in places of the actual play, the actual track that they're not supposed to be, and we're trying to run them out. It's insanity. It's like a kindergarten for grown people. That's the best way I can explain it. So I've seen everything. I've worked music festivals. There was a music festival, and some of your listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about now because the hurricane just affected this area. It was in Gulf Shores, Alabama, which is right next door to Orange Beach, Alabama. And that area, just like I said, just got hit by the recent hurricane. They had a festival there that went on the beach in Gulf Shores called the Hangout Music Festival. And it had acts from everywhere. Well, we were the very first security company to ever work that event. We were the guinea pigs. They brought us in, and you'd be amazed when you put, I know on the two of the biggest nights, because the thing lasted like 4 nights. Well, the 2 biggest nights, I'm going to estimate we probably had 25,000 people within a spot on a beach that was a quarter of a mile or half a mile. So 25,000, especially a bunch of college age, alcohol consuming college age or late 20s, early 30s. And some of the stuff we saw, I mean, we had a guy passed out one night on us as we're cleaning getting everybody to run off the beach. He passes out. They have a thing that we call the shredder. I don't know what they call it. Looks like a big lawnmower looking thing that runs over the beach and picks up the trash.
Okay.
Well, this guy almost gets run over because he's passed out in the sand and the guy doesn't see him, but we catch it just in time to get him out of the way before the guy runs him over. We catch a kid that had jumped the guardrail and gone under the stage at one of the smaller areas of the venue. We're chasing him, trying to find him. And in the midst of chasing him, trying to get the guy and get him under control to turn him over to the police, we come out of the VIP tent that's connected to it. And there's a guy laying face down, a different guy, not the same guy, laying face down on the ground on the asphalt. And he is in a full-blown swimming, like a full-stroke swimming motion. So we stand there in amazement because we're not sure what's wrong with this guy. We are pretty sure he's on something. We just don't know what it is. One of my buddies that worked with us, he was on another response team we had. Well, he heard the call, so he comes charging over there. Well, he comes blasting out of the tent we just came out of, just about runs the guy over, slams on brakes. He's hovering over the top of him. I can't tell you exactly what he said because I don't want to use that language again. He's very curious on what's wrong with this guy. And all of a sudden, the guy on the ground goes, "I'm not waiting for you any longer, Dory. I'm going home." And he starts long stroking again. So my buddy, his name is J.D. Austin, looks at the paramedics that are standing beside us. And this is still one of the best lines I ever heard from any support staff. He goes, "Hey, man, y'all not going to do nothing for this guy?" And the female paramedic that's standing there goes, "I ain't doing nothing with him until he gets to shore." So, I mean, that's just the kind of stuff we dealt with. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, of course, when you get raw numbers like that in such a confined space, of course you're going to have issues. But it wasn't all bad. I mean, like I said, I got an opportunity to meet a lot of folks. I got a chance to meet NASCAR drivers. I got a chance to meet music performers. I remember spending about 45 minutes one night backstage at an open air amphitheater down in Orange Beach, Alabama. And after the show was over, it's a retro style concert, big 80s acts. And I'm sitting in a Adirondack chair by a fire pit talking to Billy Gibbons, famous guitarist for ZZ Top. I spent 45 minutes talking to him. And I'm wanting to ask him every question in the world. Like I can't, there's so many questions in my head to ask him, I can't even process them. And he stops me. Like about 10 minutes into the conversation, he stops me. He said, hey, buddy. And I'm thinking he's about to tell me, "Hey, man, shut up and go away. I've had a rough night." He was in his 60s at that point. He already had come off the bus with 2 young ladies. If you put both their ages together, they weren't half as old as he was. He'd had a rough night. And then he said, this is what he said. He said, "Look, man," he said, "tell me a little bit about you." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Tell me a little bit about you." I said, "You want to know about me?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, and then the stupidest thing I said, "Do you not know who you are?" Well, of course he knew who he was. He's Billy Gibbons. He goes, "Yeah." I said, "You're Billy Gibbons. You're one of the greatest guitarists that ever lived." I said, "You are, an iconic member of ZZ Top." And he goes, "I know that." He said, "I see him in the mirror every morning." He said, "But I want to know about you." That's the kind of stuff, like I told people, you can't make that stuff up. Billy Gibbons wants to know about me. He wants to know who I am. And, I'm married and got kids and all this kind of stuff. And he was absolutely captivated while I was telling him these, what I thought was just insignificant facts about me. I spent part-time and full-time with him. I was there for about 7 years. Probably the only reason I left the company when I did was I just was never home because he always had me on the road going somewhere. I was always based out of somewhere else. And I just missed, like my 2 younger kids, I missed both of them growing up. But when I first started with them, my son was going into the 6th grade. And when I left in April of 1 year and he graduated in May of that same year. So, I mean, I essentially missed his entire, school, his entire, sixth grade. Yeah, I missed all of his junior high and all of his high school. And of course, my youngest daughter, she was in like the 10th grade. So, I mean, I essentially missed most of her. It was time for me to go. And I still have friends of mine that know me and remember me from those days and go, man, you had the greatest job ever. I said, will you shut up? I'm so sick of hearing that. Yes, it was nice, but it was not the greatest job ever. There's too many stories to tell. That would take, you and I would have to do a whole series, like a whole season series of, stories from the bus kind of deal. But, sorry, I can't say that. That's probably copyrighted. Yeah, I can't say stories from the back of the tour bus. I think somebody copyrighted that. So, but
I'll pretend I didn't hear it.
All kind of crazy stuff. But like I said, I don't know. That's some highlight stuff I had. Of course, I've done a lot of things. Like I've worked in corrections for quite a few years. I could tell absolute horror stories about stuff I saw there. I told a previous podcast I was on, I told the host, I said, there's stuff, and that's been 10 years since I did. It's been at least 10 or 11 years since I actually worked in corrections. And there's still stuff that I wake up at night in cold sweats, a flashback memory in my mind. And I wake up just dripping with sweat because I feel like I'm back in that moment. My wife tells me all the time I got a head full of useless knowledge. So I just decided to put it down, hit the record button, and just start talking, see how it turned out. So.
But that's the type of stuff that fits well on podcasts, though, William. People love stories.
So. Yeah, I guess so. Oh, I tell you, storytelling. I've had some crazy stories told on my show, and then of course I've shared some crazy stories on some other podcasts. So, I love listening. I love to listen to stories too. That's why we were talking about before we got started. My diversity of listening in the podcast world has grown so much since I actually started one. I was very specific on stuff I listened to, but now I listen to just about anything within reason. I guess yours fits in it. I've run across some really crazy content that I can't deal with it. So
I try to keep a little sense of order in the Sherpa Chalet when I can.
Sherpa Chalet. See, I got to come up with something snappy like that. So when I'm like broadcasting from the underground or what, I got to come up with something impressive. I'm from Mississippi though. I told a guy the other day we were doing just a standard phone interview. And I said, man, I'm so glad you called me. And he said, why is that? I said, because if I'd have called you and you'd have seen that 601 area code, you'd have thought it was a country code and you wouldn't have answered. You would have thought it was a telemarketer or something.
We're here on Zoom, so we didn't have to worry about that this time.
Right. That is absolutely right.
Did you have any specific favorite episodes in the ones that you've done so far? Were there any standouts? I know it's kind of hard to ask hosts because everybody's like, well, it's the next one that I'm going to do that's going to be my favorite.
Well, when it comes to the actual episodes, I'm probably my harshest critic. I feel like with every episode I put out, I get a little better, and I think the content gets a little better. But I'm such a critic of my own work. I still, even on an episode that I would say, man, I loved that episode, I still find problems with it. People say, oh, you go back. Like, yes, I go back and listen to every episode I do after it's published because I want to see what did I miss. Because when you're editing and all, yeah, I think I got it all. Golly, I can't believe that. What's that clicking racket? I didn't hear that when I was editing. So, I don't have as much content going as you do because I heard you say something about you're in season 4, you're starting season 4. And we didn't really talk about how many episodes you drop a season, but like me personally, somebody asked me this the other day, and I'm not 100% sure where this came from, but I, for some reason, decided that I wanted to have 24 episodes per season. And somebody said, "Where'd you get that from?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know if it's because of I grew up on television, and that television episodes usually run about 22 to 24 episodes a season."
That's exactly what I do.
I just thought that sounded like a good number, I guess. So I only have, I just started season 3. Matter of fact, I've got the episode I got dropping in the morning will be my 54th episode, 53rd episode, because I don't count my preview episodes. They're episode 0. I don't count them. So I got 53 actual content episodes after tomorrow. In the 53, probably my favorite episode, what I call not famous, because I call them regular folks, was a young man from my community that I watched grow up from a young boy to adulthood now. And he's a pitcher. He's a professional pitcher now. He got drafted by the Tampa Bay Rays. He and I sat down, and I took him all the way back to Little League, and we just kind of followed his progress from when he was a little fella all the way up to current day. And that was, from a storytelling standpoint, it was perfect because it laid out his entire career. And we were able to kind of intermingle his personal life into that sports story, that trip that he took through baseball. That was probably my favorite episode from what I'd consider a not famous person. Now, when you talk about famous people, talking about Hollywood types, I've got a tie for that. I interviewed Mr. Jack O'Halloran. And Jack O'Halloran, the first time I ever heard anything about Jack O'Halloran, and I didn't realize this, he was in King Kong, but I didn't realize that until he brought it up in the interview. And the original King Kong, the 76 version, 74, whenever it was. But I remember him from Superman, the original Superman trilogy, not all that other junk that come out with, as a character Non. And I got a chance to watch him in a lot of stuff, and I wanted a chance to talk to him. And then as we talked, he had a book that he's written, or it's going to be more than that. It's going to be a series of movies and everything. And we talked about some real American history, like some stuff that you're not going to hear in a history book. And I could have just sat and talked to him for hours. I mean, this guy was just that intriguing. And he was my top interview at that point. But then a few weeks later, I stumbled across a guy during an interview named Sean Kanan. I was a huge Karate Kid fan back in the day, and he was the villain in Karate Kid 3. That's where I first saw him. Of course, he's a pretty boy now. He's a good-looking guy, and he did a lot of soap operas and stuff like that. And, of course, while he was on there, he talked about his new digital series that he's got on Amazon called Studio City. And we talked about all kinds of stuff. He talked about how he was learning Mandarin Chinese just to keep his mind sharp, during the pandemic and things were kind of slow down. When I got done with him, I turned everything off, thanked him for being on there, and we hung up. And I thought, who in the world learns Mandarin Chinese just for the heck of it? You see what I'm saying? Why would you do that? Just to do it. But he was another guy that was extremely intriguing, a guy that he's one of those Hollywood types that if I ever got a chance to meet him, I'd like to hang out with him for the afternoon, just sort of see what Sean Kanan's really all about, that kind of guy. Yeah. So that's probably my top at this point. I do have one. We weren't joking. You were talking about an interview you did a few weeks ago, I think, and you were talking about a Halloween special you're going to do, dealing with like paranormal stuff. Now, I have done a few. Let's see, I've done two. Yeah, I've done two. No, three. I've done 3 paranormal interviews so far. And I'm one of those closet believers. Like, I want to believe. I really do. I tell them that. I want to believe, but you just got to show me. You got to give me some real evidence because I'm a facts guy. And they give me the same old answer. You got to have your own experience. Well, there is one guy that I'm working on, and one of my previous paranormal guests is trying to help me get this interview lined up. A guy named Steve Gonsalves. Now, Steve Gonsalves was involved with the Ghost Hunter franchise back on Travel Channel and A&E and all. And the reason I want to interview him is not because of the paranormal stuff, because as they would say, Steve Gonsalves is a guy, he's an OG in the paranormal world. Like, he was one of the original gangsters. He was the guy. I want to interview him because he and I think a lot alike. He's an ex-law enforcement guy, and he tries to bring as much reason and logic and facts into an investigation as possible. That's why I want to talk to him. So if I land him and the interview goes well, which I figure it will, if I'm ever back on your show, you don't even have to ask me that question anymore. My top interview is going to be Steve Gonsalves if I land him. So I don't know if we're working on that right now. So
okay, I will keep my fingers crossed for you for that one.
Yeah, he's a paranormal. If we're going to talk about paranormal, he's an OG. That's if you landed him, that'd be solid right there. That's what the kids would say. That'd be solid. So.
Earlier, you said you've been listening to so many different types of podcasts. I was wondering, what are a few of your favorites?
I don't know if I have. If I had to say one specific favorite, I would have to say I'm a Joe Rogan guy. I really like Joe Rogan and his content. I love his variety of guests. I was listening to Joe Rogan long before the term podcast, I think, was even invented. Like Joe Rogan just had an interview show is what it was. It just happened to be, I think it got lumped into podcasting with everything else. I still listen to his stuff. I still love to catch his YouTube stuff, because now he's exclusively with Spotify. So, but I still love catching his YouTube, because he's got a lot of big catalog on YouTube. I like true crime stuff. I love to listen to true crime. And every now and then I love to sit down and just binge on some, strange and unexplained stuff. Those disappearances that can't be explained and all that kind of stuff. So every now and then I love to. But if I sit and listen to that kind of stuff, I usually binge 6 or 8 episodes at a time of that. I don't just sit and listen to a single episode.
This is the part that you've been looking forward to, William.
Oh, is this the part I'm looking forward to?
Yes, it is.
Let's see what my hair looks like.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
He has to make sure that every knot hair is not in place, right?
Yeah. Every hair that I don't have on my bald head is in place. I'm ready to go.
Okay. So we have a portion called Shameless Self-Promotion.
Shameless self-promotion.
And that's where you can let everybody know where they can follow you and check out the World of Walley.
That sounds like a winner to me. Well, first of all, I am on, I'm not going to say I'm on every listening platform. I'm on about 12 of them, including even stuff like iHeartRadio, which I had a listener let me know I was actually on it. I didn't even know that till about 2 months ago. But I'm on all the major platforms, Spotify and Apple and Google and, like I said, iHeartRadio, and then some other minuscule ones like Breaker and Castro and all that kind of stuff. But you can find me in any of those. I've also got a Facebook page. It's called World of Walley. Real easy to remember. I've got a personal Facebook page. If you stumble across me on there, I'll be the guy from Columbia, Mississippi. Good-looking, bald-headed fella. You'll know the one. And then on Instagram, I am World of Walley _official. And our World of Walley also has an IMDb page if you want to check it out there. So, and that'll give you a listing of all the guests I've had in the past.
The show, once again, World of Walley, and we've been talking to you, Mr. William Walley. William, thank you so much for swinging by.
Man, I have had a blast. From Mississippi to New York. I can't thank you enough, man.
Let's get back to the Sherpa.
Sorry about that.
No!
And now it's time for Sherpa Suggestions.
Since we were talking about the World of Walley, I figured that today's Sherpa Suggestions should be the most popular podcasts in the world. And this is from an article on the most popular podcasts in the world in the summer of 2020 on Spotify. And you can listen to Too Many Podcasts on Spotify, by the way. Just look for Jim the Podcast Sherpa, just in case you don't see the title. I'm in there. I've seen me. I know I'm there. So, what were the most popular ones in the world? It was the Michelle Obama Podcast, NPR News Now and The Daily, Call Her Daddy, TED Talks Daily, Harry Potter at Home, readings, as read by voices like Daniel Radcliffe and Helena Bonham Carter. And also we had some true crime stuff that was really popular. Crime Junkie, Last Podcast on the Left, and My Favorite Murder. Hey, what was my favorite murder? I guess my favorite murder would be that little roach that was crawling across the desk here while I was thinking of what I was going to do for my Sherpa suggestions. Yeah, that'll work. Thank you so much to William Walley of World of Walley. Be sure to check out his podcast and come back to this one. On Friday, we've got an interview with a guy named John Orlando, host of the PVD podcast. And John is actually a ring announcer for independent wrestling circuits. And he's got some really cool stories to tell. And we had a lot of fun just chatting about this and that, even just chatting about doing podcasts. Very enjoyable, nice guy, just like William, lots of fun. You know, if you want to follow this show on social media, just look for the word Sherpalution. And if you check out Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter with that word, you will find the show there. And you can get to hear what's going on every month. And once the interviews are recorded, I usually put a little blurb in there. But we let you know what things are coming up. And also, you can find that information from my website, Sherpalution.com. So thanks again for coming on down to the Sherpa Chalet and having a listen. Mr. Bruce, I know the world of Mr. Bruce is probably really interesting. I think we have to have a seat here and we'll have one of the Sherpaloo studio bots at the door. So have a seat, sir, and let's chat. So in the meantime, I'm going to talk to Mr. Bruce, and you guys can see yourselves out. See you on Friday. Viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Oh. Yeah, I'll come back now, you hear?